Hello, you're watching Middle East Matters here on France 24. I'm Nadia Massi. In the show this week, efforts to bring justice to the tens of thousands tortured and hundreds of thousands more killed by the regime of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. With the new administration now in power for 17 months, is enough being done to investigate and prosecute those accused? And does this nascent administration, led by a former jihadist, Ahmed al-Sharaa, have both the will and the ability to get justice done? Well, some tentative steps have been taken. A trial is underway in Damascus at the moment of Bashar al-Assad himself and his brother Maher, although neither are in Syria and thus are being tried in absentia. Our report by Karis Garland.
A historic trial long awaited by the Syrian people. In April, Atef Najib became the first Assad-era official to face the courts since the ousting of his cousin, Bashar al-Assad. The longtime president and his brother Maher are both being tried in absentia. As the former head of political security in Daraa, Najib is seen by some as responsible for sparking the country's 2011 uprising by directing a crackdown on protests there. Those protests had swelled in response to accusations that his forces tortured children, leading to severe injuries and death. A judge has said Najib is facing charges that amount to crimes against humanity.
The acts attributed to you and the other fugitive defendants are classified not only as ordinary crimes, but as serious violations of human rights and war crimes.
Throughout nearly 14 years of civil war, more than 500,000 people were killed, millions of others were displaced, while tens of thousands disappeared, many into the country's brutal prison system. After Assad's toppling in December 2024, Syria's new government, led by President Ahmed al-Sharaa, promised to bring those responsible for atrocities to justice. Authorities had faced some criticism over delays in this, but in recent weeks they've announced the arrests of several former military and security officials. That includes the so-called Butcher of Tadamon, Amjad Youssef. Youssef got his nickname after a video was leaked showing him shooting dead 41 blindfolded and bound men and throwing them into a trench in the South Damascus suburb in 2013. Analysts have said a proper transitional justice process could help to curb intercommunal violence in Syria, which has seen sectarian massacres and sporadic killings since the fall of Assad.
All right, well, I'm pleased to say we're joined now on the programme by Habib Nassar. He's a lawyer and activist. He previously worked at the Independent Institution on Missing Persons in Syria. Habib, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
Look, first of all, let's talk about this trial in Damascus that we heard about in our report a few minutes ago. How big of a deal is the trial in your view, given that Assad and his brother Maher are not in court at all and aren't in Syria?
I must say that the images from the trial of Atef Najib were extremely powerful, despite the absence of Bashar al-Assad. As a matter of fact, I think that the Syrian public was deeply moved by the images of the trial and by the symbolism of these trials for a number of reasons. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
You hear me. Thank you very much. So I would say it's particularly significant on several levels. So first of all, because this is the first trial taking place inside Syria of senior officials of the Assad regime. And while Bashar al-Assad and his brother Maher, who commanded the notorious 4th Division, are being tried in absentia, their cousin Atef Najib, a former security official, was arrested and is physically present at the court. And secondly, I would say that it is particularly significant because it deals with probably the first act of defiance, by the Syrian population against the regime that was brutally repressed in 2011. And these events in Daraa did trigger mass protests that led to a full-scale revolution in Syria.
Yes, and you mentioned the Atif Najib, of course. We've also had, in the past couple of weeks, something else we saw in our report a bit earlier on, the arrest of Amjad Yusuf. He was, as we saw there, known as the Butcher of Tadaman because of his role in brutally killing people relatively near the beginning of the civil war in 2013. But I wonder what you make of this argument that his arrest, as well as the trial of Najib that you were just talking about there, sort of spotlights a couple of individuals, bad guys, who are well known in Syria, but that this is rather sort of selective, performative justice being carried out by authorities in Damascus and doesn't go deep enough to recognise the scale of the crimes committed by the previous regime.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. So this is a major media moment, but media moments are not enough. And indeed, I think that the Syrian civil society has been very critical of this trial. It has been described as performative justice. Critics fear very much that it may become a one-off media-driven process lacking a strong legal framework and a coherent, I would say, prosecutorial strategy capable of addressing tens, if not hundreds of thousands of alleged perpetrators. So it also remains very unclear how this trial fit within a broader transitional justice vision for the country. I do very much agree with this criticism, yes.
Look, as an expert in all of this, and when we look at the scale of the crimes committed, as I said earlier on, hundreds of thousands of people were killed in the civil war. Is there another country that you look to and you can say, look, they got it right and Syria needs to copy that model, learn from them, or really is what happens sort of on a quite different scale and Syria really needs to find its own way here?
Yeah, no, I would say Syria will need to find its own way. I mean, you cannot copy a model from a different country, a different context with different dynamics, and then paste it within the Syrian context. This is not how it happens. Of course, we can look at other countries. I could think, for example, of Argentina and how long the trials of the military junta, how long they took, and how complicated the process was. And the lesson we can draw from Argentina is that transitional justice and accountability are not linear processes. It's a zigzag. It's ups and downs. In Argentina, the trial started in the early 80s. They then faced amnesty laws and presidential pardons until the Supreme Court intervened in the early 2000s. So almost 15 years later, and the trials started again with obviously political will by the government back then to continue this trial. So this is just to show that transitional justice is highly complicated. It's a long process. It cannot be resolved in a few years. I do understand that the Syrians get impatient, and this is normal, but it's important to get the right framework in place before starting a large-scale trial.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you're saying, that, look, this takes a very long time. It is obviously profoundly complex. But from what we see so far, is the government of al-Sharaa taking the right steps? I mean, we talked about it being performative justice, arguably. Of course, we can't ignore the fact that al-Sharaa himself, used to run a jihadist group. Is this really the right individual to be pushing all of this forward?
He is currently the head of state of Syria. and he is overseeing its government. And the government has shown some positive signs that it is willing to initiate a transitional justice process. However, for a transitional justice process to be credible and inclusive, there need to be a number of conditions in place. And first of all is a clear political will to move forward and to move forward in a comprehensive way, because sometimes also some of the measures being taken are being criticized or at least perceived as selective justice, targeting only some of the perpetrators, but not all of the perpetrators in the Syrian context, and including some of the armed groups from the opposition who were involved in very serious crimes. And I can mention here, for example, a couple of days before the trial of Atif Najib started, Syria did welcome back to the country the leader of Jaish al-Islam, one of the leaders of Jaish al-Islam, Mr. Aysam al-Buaidini, who the Jaish al-Islam is being accused of involvement in the disappearance of the Duma Four, which are four prominent human rights lawyers and documenters who were disappeared in the area of Duma. And this is an iconic case in Syria, but very little is being done. And this individual who returned to Syria from UAE a few days ago needs to be interrogated. There is a need to know what information he might have on this case.
Just a final thought from you then. These are Syrian internal efforts that we're talking about. Of course, it is Syria's story. It is Syria's pain. Syrians are the victims here. But what do you think about international efforts as well to try and find justice? There has been some tentative cases here in France, among them to try and internationally push this forward. Could the International Criminal Court, should it be playing a bigger role?
No, what I'm going to say here is that there are four ad hoc bodies at the UN dealing with justice in Syria: the Commission of Inquiry, the IIIM, and the Independent Institution on Missing Persons for Syria. And these three bodies have been working with the Syrian civil society for many years to lay the groundwork for justice in Syria. So I think it is essential today, to build on the legacy that the Syrian civil society has been developing in the area of justice and accountability over 14 years, including the trials that have taken place before a number of courts in Europe based on universal jurisdiction and other forms of extraterritorial jurisdiction, as you have just mentioned. Because there is a lot to learn from this experience. And I think what is probably also lacking is a more prominent role for the Syrian society in these processes and for victim groups. And what I want to say to conclude maybe is that a few days ago, 27 Syrian organizations and victim groups did release a landmark report on pathways for criminal accountability in Syria that do put forward a number of options for an inclusive and credible process of accountability in Syria. And it is key for the authorities to work hand in hand with its civil society.
As you say, it is a complex, long process, one that will run and run. Really good to get your analysis. Thank you for your time. Habib Nassar talking to us there.
Thank you very much.
And with that, you've been watching Middle East Matters here on Around the World.